First of all, how did the former police investigator become a renowned crime writer all over the world?
Well, I think all writers start as readers, and I've always read a lot. And quite early, I also understood that I like to write. Back in children's school, I like to change the sentence, make it longer, make it more scary. But I never thought that I was going to be either an investigator or an author, and by coincidence almost I've ended up being both.
How many of the cases you wrote about are real or inspired by actual events?
Well, that seems to be a common misunderstanding, that I write about cases that I've myself have investigated as a policeman, but that is true for my debut novel. My first novel is based on a true murder story about an old man who was found brutally murdered in his own house in my town, and he was actually found on my first day as being a police. So my first crime scene was this murder scene, and to step over that threshold, to walk in the footsteps of this real murder, that kind of feeling that is hard to describe, to see how there had been a fight going on in this house, who ended up in the room where he was found dead. That feeling was what I tried to put into words in my first novel. It's not translated into Romanian, and it's not that good either, so there's no loss. But since then, all my novels are more based on kind of thematic. My latest novel in Romania, it's called Blindgang in Norwegian, or Ordeal in English. It's about when an investigating goes wrong, when the police are only following one lead, one trace, and how difficult it is to see the obvious mistakes and turn and go back and then another direction. So that is how I find my stories. But even though since this first book, or since my first crime scene, I've been to several crime scenes since then, of course, and I think that is my strength as a author. My background as a chief inspector has shaped me as a human being, and I think it's visible in my books, because in all these crime scenes I have met people who have been victims of serious crimes, and I also met people who have committed these crimes, and to stand face to face to other people with anger, grief, despair, and remorse have been valuable to me, and I hope it make it possible to create some kind of authentic nerve in my stories, some kind of true crime feelings that is difficult to come up with if you haven't walked in those footsteps that I have done.
I asked you this question because last year I spoke with Irsa from Iceland.
Yeah.
And she has a series with 6 novels with Hulda and Freya, and she told me that most of the cases she spoke about in those novels are actual events. That's why I ask you these questions, not that you investigated them, but you heard about them or you read about them.
Yes. So your question is really, where do you get your ideas and
ideas for your novels. Yes,
and that is a question authors get all the time, and many authors have some kind of funny answer to that, like I'm getting my ideas from a net shop or something. But I think I'm always looking for good ideas, and the answer is I get my ideas from real life. But I think the good ideas is when or the good books, the good stories are when several ideas collide together. Something here, something there, and you put together into a whole new story. And for my latest novel in Romania, that is also true. It's a friend of mine bought an old house, and in the basement of this old house, there was a wall, a safe, and there was no key. That was the only thing left in this house, and this safe was too big to carry out up the stairs or bring outside. That was why it was left inside. And for a very long time, he was wondering what could be inside. And that is the start also of my latest novel, because when the doors to this vault or this safe is open, that is when the story also is opened. And so that is an example of where I get my ideas from real life.
Are there serial killers in Norway, or it was needed an American serial killer, e.g. Robert Godwin? Although we still have Haglund in The Caveman.
We had one serial killer in the 70s. You know, in The Caveman, the serial killer turns up when on a crime scene there is they find a fingerprint, and when they do a search in the international databases, these fingerprints belongs to a man who is wanted by the FBI for a series of killings in America. And you know, that is where the serial murders are in America. So I'm bringing an American serial killer to Norway, and then it kind of makes sense. But the thing is, I have actually met a serial killer on my vacation in Spain. There was a big police operation in my neighborhood, and I arrested one of my neighbors, and he was an Englishman wanted for 3 killings in Spain. So and I think at least I met him because he lived almost next door. But this was back in, I believe, 2004. So that is my only meeting with what I believe was a serial killer. But that is the scary thing. He could live next door, right?
You still have Haglund from the previous novel, which he can be considered a serial killer.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you know the definition of a serial killer, at least made by the FBI, is when you have committed more than 2 killings at different time and place. That is a serial killer. And I think that in the most novels there are serial killers, but you know, I'm writing realistic police procedures, and since we don't have any real serial killers in the Nordic countries, I don't like to bring them in. But Haglund is one, yes, it could be one.
Yes, because he committed one in the past, 17 years ago, and now after he's released, he abducts another girl, and he's about to commit. Eventually to commit another murder.
Yeah, so at least a double murder, yes.
So he can be considered a serial killer or a featured serial killer.
Well, not to the according to the FBI standards, because then you have to kill more than two to be a serial killer, to be a serie.
How much of the former police investigator Jørn Lier Horst is reflected in Detective William Wisting?
More than I usually admit. You know, when I started to write these crime novels back in the 2004, I was tired about reading about police detective that were solving murder cases all by themselves while being drunk, waking up next day, rubbing their beer, whiskey on the table. And I wanted a policeman as the main character who was more like the policeman I knew from my everyday, and that became William Wisting. But to tell you that he is very much like me is also to brag about myself, because Wisting is he's a good investigator, but even more he is a very good human being, I believe. So, but of course there is, because between the lines in my novels there are some commentary to police work, to crime politics, and that is, of course, is my point of view on those things. There's a lot of me in Wisting, of course.
Who inspired you when you created Wisting? Or actually his daughter Lina. Did the readers ask you to offer a more significant role to a female character to help Wisting?
No, I don't think that was a reader's demand. It was more like in the first stories, everything you read is through Wisting's eyes. And what I needed after 4 or 5 books was a kind of outside point of view, someone outside looking into the police work and looking at Wisting. And his daughter has been there from the early beginnings. In the Norwegian novels, you will see she's getting work at the local newspaper and is doing a good job, and is after a while working in Norway's biggest newspaper as a crime reporter. And that is a very interesting dynamic, kind of father-daughter relationship, because in different ways the steps are crossing each other. They are both looking into the same case, but from different kind of view, and they can't really talk to each other because she can't reveal her sources, and Wisting can't reveal how police are working. So they are kind of parallel investigating and not talking to each other about what they're about looking into. That's make interesting father-daughter relationship, I think.
And the first part of the question was, who inspired you when you created Wisting?
Who inspired me? I don't think I have any real inspiration, because what inspired me most was that I didn't want to make or create a character that was had some kind of illness, that was drunk, that was having problems in his life. So the special thing about Wisting is that there's nothing special with him. There is I hadn't been the same policeman or writer if it hadn't been for the Swedish author Henning Mankell and his books about Kurt Wallander. Because when I started at the police academy, I wrote the first novel about Kurt Wallander. And afterwards I was thinking, this is what I want with my education. I want to be a policeman as Kurt Wallander, or not that fat, grumpy old man, but an investigator that was working with big cases and in the way that Kurt Wallander did. So Henning Mankell has inspired me in my work as a policeman. I could have ended up as a trafficking police, but ended up as a chief inspector in the criminal investigation department. And of course, Henning Mankell and Kurt Wallander also has influence on my writing. In that, I mean, I like to read and I like to write novels where there is not a lot of kind of outside action. There's no gunfights, car chasing, or that kind of things. I like to read crime novels where the story sneaks up under your skin and get you hooked, and that is also how I try to write.
John Esbo said about his most famous character that he's a tragic hero, Harry Hule, that he would never be happy, this character of him. Do you think Wisting is a tragic hero? Did you intend from the beginning to make him suffer in kind of personal way? Like example, his wife's death, being dumped by Suzanne, his former girlfriend, or when he started loving her, or the internal affair in the hunting dogs.
Wisting is not a tragic hero, rather the opposite. But what I try to do is to write novels not just only about how Wisting solves the cases, but also what the cases does to him, because he is changing. He develops through the series. So almost from each chapter, or at least from each novel, there are things happening in his life, changing from novel to novel. And in the first novels, in the Norwegian novels, he's also happily married. But after 4 or 5 novels, I understood why so many of these tragic heroes were widowers or divorced, because it was quite an effort to all the time writing about the wife. She has to be somewhere in the story from novel to novel. So I found out that the easiest way to get out of that problem was to kill her. So she dies in one of the early books, and in the later books, and in this latest book, she is only a memory. And by surprise, Wisting finds out how he actually is capable to love 2 women in his life. Suzanne, there's also room for her.
How do you gather information about each of your new novel?
You might say that the stuff gets easy to me. I worked as a policeman in 20 years, so that is kind of 20 years of research. But as I mentioned, I always write about a theme, so I like to dive into that material, reading books and research material to get things right. It might end up with 1 or 2 sentences in the novel, but I like to be freshed up myself. And in the latest novel, the theme is police working going wrong, and there's a lot of reports and material about that. So that is how I prepare myself for writing. But then it's convenient because Wisting's office is the office next to where I was working for several years, and he is living in the same town that I still do. So, well, all that kind of research come quite easy to me.
So that's why you chose Larvik and Stavrand instead of Oslo?
Yes, that just because me being lazy, I believe. You know, this place where the stories take place, the twin towns Larvik and Stavern, people in Norway know this place from the weather forecast. They're always mentioning them in the weather forecast and mentioning it by nice weather, sun and warmth. This place is actually a place in Norway with the most sunny days during the year. So I use this kind of contrast between, well, you might say good weather, bad weather, but also between life and death, light and darkness. So I use this area actively in my writing.
I also wanted to ask you about your theme, your second theme in The Caveman. You wrote about Line decided to write about loneliness. How is it possible that a man in the middle of the town to die and nobody knows about him for 4 months? What made you wrote about this theme?
I think that might be one of the biggest challenge to our society. People living around us being all alone, and that is also actually based on my own experience from my early days at policing. We were called out to a neighborhood where no one had seen these guys for several weeks, and we had to break into his house, and he was found like described in The Caveman. This man was sitting dead in front of his own television, and nobody had noticed for days or weeks that he was no longer among them. I think that is, well, most of all, it's sad, and the novel is some kind of comment to all of us, that we have to at least try to be more into each other, try to say hello to our neighbors at least once a week, or lighten up in our society. And that is also a problem I experienced in my later years in the police, because in my first days, when something happened on the street, if someone was stabbed with a knife, there was no problem to get people who have witnessed this to step forward and to give statement. But if something's happening today, people are taking one step back, turning their back to the crime scene. They don't want to be involved. They don't want anything to grip into their everyday life. They just want to carry out with their usual business. So that is some kind of social coldness in the modern society.
And of course, I need to ask you about the series. How did it happen to adapt your books into a marvelous series? I saw the series, the first season at least. I understood that the next season it's due to appear this year in November.
My next project is, then I believe there is a short novel not that short, like 250 pages, about Wisting being a young detective. So for and as readers, you got to learn how he solved his first case, the case that made him into the detective we have learned him to be in the series. But the next project for me is writing several books about cold cases, how to start new investigation in cold cases. And that is also based on my own cold case, an unsolved murder of a young girl back in 1999, which was just recently solved after almost 18 years. So, but I can come back to you and talk to that project later. Cold cases. There's something fascinating about cold cases where the solution is right under the surface, but there is thing that is not talked about. That is a fascinating theme.
Right. And how did it happen to adapt your books into this series, William Wisting? And what does a producer does in this kind of business?
The first season of this TV season of Wisting was on air last year, I believe, and there's a new season coming in, at least in the Nordic countries, this autumn. But even though it says that I am a producer and got paid as a producer, I took one step back from the actual production, because telling something on TV and telling something in a novel is two different things. So, and I realized quite early that these people who was going to shoot this was very professional, and there was only two things I wanted and insisted on that I have to bring from the books into the TV series, and that was that I have to shoot it in the real environments here in Larvik, Stavern, and that I also have to keep the realistic feeling that the police work has to be done as actually police work, and that is and I solved that by hiring in retired crime scene investigators and that sort of thing to be on the set to get things right, because I didn't have time to it, but that's how they did it.
You spoke about cold cases, and I also wanted to ask you, which series do you favor the most? William Wisting, Cold Cases, Alexander and Blix, or the children's series?
Yeah, the Blix series is thriller series that I write together with Thomas Enger, and I fancy that work because writing about Wisting, realistic police procedural, that is I'm kind of tied on my hands to get things to be realistic. In this thriller series with Alexander Blix, there's more room for serial killers, car chasing and shootouts. So that is quite fun writing about. And it's also quite fun writing for kids because, well, I like that a lot. But Wisting will always be my favorite, I believe.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciated your books and also the series. And many thanks for accepting this interview.
Well, thank you for having me.